Hello, anatomy students. It's that time again for our connective tissue notes. And today we will be talking about the second portion of our original goal, which is to learn about connective tissues. So here are some of our general characteristics. They're going to bind structures together, provide support and protection, fill spaces, produce blood cells, and store fat. Connective tissues are varied. They have a huge number of different functions, so they're a little bit trickier than the epithelial cells, but their differences make them a little easier to identify when you're looking at them under the microscope. In connective tissue, cells are separated by an extracellular matrix that is composed of organic ground substances, and there's fibers. So there's going to be collagen, elastic, and reticular fibers, and you might see some of these terms come up again when we're identifying. So the first type is loose connective tissue, and one example is areolar connective tissue. So the cells of this tissue are mainly fibroblasts. It contains many collagen and elastin fibers in a fine web-like arrangement. So when you see this web-like arrangement, it's definitely going to be a key. Another example of this loose connective tissue is adipose tissue, and it is going to have enlarged cells for storage. So here's a picture that gives you an example of loose areolar connective tissue. And just like in epithelial tissue, we want to talk about the functions. So why do we have these tissues? This one is to bind organs together. And you can check out your paper to see some of the places in the body that you might locate that tissue. Adipose tissue is also called fat. It's pretty easy to identify under the microscope. It is the only one that has this sort of signature shape, and it is for insulation and fat storage. The next major type is called dense connective tissue, and it's going to have thick bundles of collagen fibers. And there's a couple types. Again, we have dense regular and dense irregular. We also have reticular connective tissue, and you're going to look at all three of these under the microscope tomorrow. So when you look at this picture, I think you can see why it's called regular connective tissue. The fibers all run in the same direction, and they are very dense. They are closely packed together. And one of the important function of this is that it's going to bind the organs together. So when you think about tendons, ligaments, it's going to bind the muscle to the bone, and that's dense regular's function. Dense irregular, here is an example, and this is below your skin. There's your skin right there. And right here is where all of those sweat glands and blood vessels are going to be found underneath your skin. So its function below your skin is to prevent organ overexpansion in the urinary bladder or provide strength and resistance to stretching. We know that our skin needs to be able to stretch as we move and bend, but we don't want it to stretch too much, and so our dense irregular connective tissue is going to provide that function for us. All right, a term that you're probably familiar with is cartilage, and hyaline cartilage is the one that is most common in the body. It contains only collagen fibers, and you find this in your nose, the ends of long bones and ribs, in the supporting rings of the trachea and the embryonic skeleton. If you are not a vegetarian and you've ever eaten a chicken wing or a rib or something like that, you may have actually seen the ends of the long bones have that white shiny surface. That is the cartilage. The other types are elastic cartilage, and an example is found in the outer ear, and then fibrocartilage, again, has those strong collagen fibers, and is found between the vertebra and in the knee joint. So here's a pretty picture of the three different types. You have hyaline, elastic, and fibrocartilage. In our lab, we're only going to be looking at hyaline cartilage, and that's fine. On the quiz, the only thing I'm going to ask you to say is cartilage. You don't have to specify whether it's hyaline, elastic, or fibrocartilage. Just the word cartilage is enough. Last thing I would want to add is sometimes when you're looking at these under the microscopes, the way they're stained and the way they look, it's almost like peacock feathers. So that's sort of one of the things I look for when I'm thinking about whether or not something is cartilage. All right, one of the final types as we head toward the end of our notes is bone tissue. And so I know people don't think of bone as being a connective tissue, but it is. It's an extremely hard matrix composed of mineral salts deposited around collagen fibers. And there are bone cells called osteoblasts are producing the organic part of the bone, and then they become osteocytes as they mature. So we have compact bone and spongy bone, and we'll get into this more later when we talk about the skeleton, but there are two different types that we'll be observing under the microscope as we do our bone dissection. So here's an image, and it's just showing you this is a long bone, and so we're going to be zooming in here towards the end. See this little tiny box here? That's showing right here, zoomed in picture, and then we're going to zoom in even more. Here is our microscope slide. This is what you're going to be viewing in lab, and please take note that there is this central canal. We mentioned how hard bone is, but those mineral salts, as they harden, they still have to have nerves and blood vessels passing through, and so how's that going to happen? We have to have this central canal for the nerves and blood vessels to pass through. And the last one in our notes is blood. Sometimes we call it liquid connective tissue or blood, either one is acceptable. And there are three different types of cells or parts of cells. Red blood cells are called erythrocytes. White blood cells are called leukocytes. So you might be familiar with LEUK, that leukemia. So leukocytes, those are your white blood cells. And then platelets are called thrombocytes. And platelets are not actually whole cells, they're pieces of cells that participate in blood clotting. And when we study blood in the circulatory system, we'll go into that more in depth. The liquid matrix is called plasma and is not formed by the tissue cells. Again, we'll go more in depth into that as we study blood. And I think this one is pretty simple to identify under the microscope. I think red blood cells are something people are used to looking at. They have that kind of donut shape. They don't go all the way through in the center like a donut, though. It's a biconcave disc, so both sides go in, but it doesn't actually have a hole in the center. And they're going to have that signature red color. So we have a nice table at the end summarizing everything. Since one of our objectives is to be able to compare these types of tissues to one another, I think this is helpful. We have our fibrous connective tissues, which loose and dense are both a part of that. The structure of the matrix, the types of cells, and an example of the location. And then with cartilage, you have your three types, hyaline, elastic, and fibrocartilage. Some of the differences between them when you're looking at the structure of their matrix and where you might find them, but a similarity in the types of cells they contain. Bone, again, you're going to be looking at the types of cells that they contain, where you might find them. And then blood, I think, is a pretty simple one, straightforward, where you find it, what it contains, and the structure of the matrix. All right, now for a little mini quiz, just like in epithelial cells. I'm going to pause after each one, and you tell me what you think it is. All right, I hope you said that this is liquid connective tissue or blood. Okay, this example you should have said is cartilage, and this is actually hyaline cartilage, which is found in the end of long bones. I know that this example doesn't specify that, and I ask that not on the quiz. You don't have to say hyaline, you just have to say the word cartilage. this example is also cartilage, and it shows you that it comes from the ear, so I think that's a pretty good hint based on its location, but this would be elastic cartilage. Again, I won't ask on the quiz, you can just say the word cartilage. The answer to this one is bone or osseous tissue. You can see those signature rings and the central canal there for blood vessels and nerves to pass through. Right, this is dense, regular, connective. Don't just say dense connective, you need to add the word regular because these fibers are laying right next to one another in a very regular pattern. All right, last one. This is loose areolar connective tissue, and it binds organs together. If you were not able to identify these, you need to make sure that you spend some time with your flashcards. Make sure that you pick up those images and cut them out so we can practice with our flashcards and identify these different tissues.